I was working in cybersecurity, and there has been an outreach campaign, which has been probably one of the craziest I've seen in my life. We've been asking our Darknet intelligence team to go and check whether the big companies had any leaks on Darknet forums of credentials of their users. And I remember still one company to which our salesperson opened a discussion saying, our Darknet intelligence team have found 500 of your users' credentials. And you can see the screenshot here.
You've been a big fan of context and context engineering. How did it evolve from where it started beyond simple prompting to what it is right now?
The main difference between doing it several years ago and now is that you don't repeat yourself every single time and start from scratch. That's where data, where context about the business, about your market, actually is becoming your competitive advantage, not the way you prompt things.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode. Today I have one of the people that I personally start following before even kicking off the gas on the pedal with Signal-based. So Pawel, thank you very much for coming and willing to be sharing your secrets with us today.
Thanks, Joji.
We already kickstarted the session within the RevTech Accelerator, right? Talking about context. And something that really interested me into having you on the podcast is because of the fact how deep you really are into the whole topic of context engineering, right? Before we dive in there, let's just start in the traditional way, which is, what is your hot take for the go-to-market landscape at the moment?
So I think it will touch a little bit on context, but I would like to even think broader because I come from the RevOps background. So starting in sales operations and moving to revenue operations, I've always been working and operating on the edge of an intersection of business and technology. And I think what I'm seeing as a big shift happening within the last 5 years, even apart from the entire AI wave, is that we are moving from implementing point solutions to support businesses into actually designing the systems of growth. And I believe it also really nicely mirrors the change from prompt engineering in AI into actually context engineering, thinking about things more holistically, being the architects of growth versus bricklayers who just put brick by brick and trying to glue them together, right? I think we are living in a complex times where go-to-market cannot be just based on point solutions, but it needs to be thought of as a system.
Exactly, and that's been tying quite nicely to the rest of the interviews and the rest of the discussions that we had on the show, which is the whole situation where teams are rushing into buying tools without any recommendations, without any guidance. Why is this the reason why they're buying it, and how does that attribute to the bigger system? So there are like a lot of other nuggets in there that we can dig into, but how do you teach that mindset to the people within the accelerator? Because obviously you get people that are not ready to be, right? You gotta sharpen iron with iron, as I love to say. So yeah, what is the mindset in there whenever you're teaching someone who is just stepping into that role for the first time?
Yeah, I think it's also worth to share a little bit of the background of people who are joining the program. In general, those are people who have usually between 5 to even 20 years of experience, but in specific niches. They can have deep experience in enterprise sales for many years, but they are now looking into how the things are changing, and they want to know the side of all the systems, AI, and transformation. There are people who are on the advisory path. There are solopreneurs, there are fractional experts who want to deepen their expertise in the technology. Sometimes some people have more, I would say, acumen and more experience on the business side, some on the technical side, but I believe the way forward is to connect those two spheres, since the name even revenue technology is connecting revenue side of things with the technical fluency, I would say. And from that perspective, when we are talking about it in the accelerator and the importance of context and thinking holistically, I believe it's having the approach that technology always comes at the end of the journey. And I think that one of the most important things that we're touching on in the very first workshops is how to translate go-to-market strategy into RevOps transformation, and how to start from strategy, then translate it into strategic processes that are embedded in strategy, and then to implement technology that is based on the process and strategy which it follows. And I like to give an example that if you would think of this as a calculation, if you have a strong strategy, but you don't have a process to actually bring it to life, it just stays in document and nothing happens. But if you just add and stick tools because, oh, this still is the next big thing, right? Which happens now with AI, but also with many SaaS solutions, and your strategy and process is broken, then you're just multiplying things. You're getting faster to the wrong direction because strategy shapes the direction. Process allows you to align everyone to go in an effective way to the direction, and technology accelerates. It is the engine that allows you to get there faster. But you don't want probably to get quicker to a destination that is not your goal. So I would say that mindset, whether you're coming from a deep technical experience or more from operations or sales, I believe that's something that everyone needs to follow.
You've been a big fan of context and context engineering. I do know that majority of the people that do listen to this podcast understand it, but maybe you can touch briefly upon how did it evolve, right? From where it started beyond simple prompting to what it is right now.
Yeah, I think it's a very extensive but also super exciting topic. I'll try to keep it narrow and a little bit high level, but I can give also then some more specific examples to make it real. Maybe a little bit basing on my background partnering with Clay. I started the partnership with them 3 years ago, and they were one of the first platforms that on the one side, they democratized the data. So you could actually access a lot of data sources, data enrichment waterfalls in one place. But I think a second part that they made something amazing in the market is that they brought people in GTM and RevOps closer to using AI actually in the workflows that you build. And it might seem simple, but I would say it has been already a part of context engineering before context engineering has become a thing for GTM. But still, in the very beginning, I was thinking of it mainly as prompts. So when I've been building, for example, outbound campaigns or inbound qualification network, ICP scoring models, I've put those columns sometimes where I used a specific model, even the ability to be able to call Anthropic for this specific thing and Gemini for another one and OpenAI for this specific thing, even to compare them back to back, which one will perform better. It's been something amazing. And being able to send agents to the web and get data in a structured way with intelligence, it's been exciting to watch. But the majority of it and what I've been seeing in the space and doing myself is designing prompts, how I can design better prompts and better prompts for that. But one thing that Clay does is actually allowed within the prompts to embed very easily to attach the context from the previous columns in the tables, like from the previous data. And I would say this was some part of a initial context engineering, because the message that you've been writing, for example, was embedded in the context to whom you are writing it, what is the company, what is the persona, what is the recent context. And this has often changed the output tremendously. And if you just use ChatGPT to write me an outbound email, right? Everyone was seeing this, that it was usually trash. But when you embedded it in context and you allowed yourself to actually bring context to AI, you saw, wow, it's performing better. And of course, now like everything has changed and almost every platform is allowing you to bring some context of what is your ICP, what is your value proposition, which market you work in. Give me some information about your company, because people started realizing, oh, actually embedding AI within a specific context, it performs better. It can cut through the noise. It's not created like one for many, but it's one-to-one. And you can make your creative ideas effective at scale without sounding delusional, I would say. Yeah, this is just one example of how I've been transitioning myself from prompting to designing context. But I believe now it's a much bigger thing because AI is running on context. Context window have been more and bigger. And it doesn't mean that more context always means better results, because there is also some kind of hallucination at some point where you give too much context. So there's many things we could dig deeper in, but what I would say is the main difference between doing it several years ago and now is that you don't repeat yourself every single time and start from scratch. But actually, when you have context, you can start on a solid foundation. And that's where data, where context about the business, about your market, actually is becoming your competitive advantage, not the way you prompt things.
I've been personally talking to quite a few AI SDRs, and I can comfortably say that scraping the post only does not make the best message. But okay, and you mentioned building stuff from scratch, right? And how does then you embed context engineering within your first signal-based engine? How do you do that?
Yeah, actually, my first signal-based campaign when I was touching it and was close to it was back in 2021, I believe. So 5 years ago, ChatGPT wasn't a thing at that point, so I wasn't thinking of AI there, but kind of how we can find a signal that would be too good to ignore, right? And I think this is a good question to ask when you're building signal-based campaign. And maybe this example will be one of the craziest that you've heard on signals, but it's probably because I've worked in a very specific company at that point. I was working in cybersecurity and in fraud prevention company, preventing payment frauds, account takeover for banks, financial institutions, travel, e-commerce. And an interesting thing that we had in the company, we had a group of people who were a Darknet intelligence team. So they've been actually going to Darknet as hackers, but to being able to see what are the latest tactics of the people who are doing wrongdoings there and who are committing fraud, to be able to reverse engineer their newest tactics and to be able to prevent it for the companies we've been serving. And there has been an outreach campaign, which has been probably one of the craziest I've seen in my life, is that we've been asking our Darknet intelligence team to go and check whether the big companies, like major accounts that we are talking to, had any leaks on Darknet forums of credentials of their users. And I remember still one company, a big company, to which our salesperson opened a discussion saying, our Darknet intelligence team have found 500 of your users' credentials, including their login and passwords, being actually sold on this Darknet forum, and you can see the screenshot here. And it's not something that you can ignore.
For
right?
sure.
If you're receiving such a message, of course, it wasn't that scalable as we think of signals nowadays, but it's actually been probably, I was trying to recall my first signal-based outreach in my life before this session, and I felt like probably this was the one that I first saw the strength of a signal that is embedded in a specific context that is unique and that actually has implications for a specific business. So it's too good to ignore. And actually, it wasn't just to have a wow effect, but it actually was something that our product was helping to prevent. So it was solving a specific pain point, and we could have a very specific discussion how we can prevent this from happening in the future.
That's crazy.
Right? So
a question that occurs, and this is because of the fact that how I'm also designing my own signal-based engine. Whenever we talk to vendors, there are not thousands of vendors within the go-to-market and HR space. You might ask why HR, I'll mention it later, but in essence, you do have a certain amount of companies that are entering the market, right? So it's not like you really need to do it at scale, although 300 companies, you can argue if you want to automate that or not. But I wonder, is it really worth automating fully your signal-based outbound engine? What do you think about that?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the type of outbound that you're doing. And when I'm thinking about outbound, I think of three different approaches. You can have one-to-many outbound, one-to-few, and one-to-one. And I would say for one-to-many, and in many cases for one-to-few approach, when you're targeting one-to-many, is you have a huge TAM, and sometimes you have tens of thousands, sometimes you have hundreds of thousands. And I've even worked with companies that had millions in the addressable market. And those were, for example, companies doing outbound to restaurants. And those were companies providing SaaS solutions to restaurants. And if you think of the number of restaurants in the US, the potential there is huge. So you would not go with one-to-one picking everything. We've been building the infrastructure to send 30, 40,000 emails per month, and it was performing really good. And it was generating hundreds of thousands in new pipeline or even millions, because the scale there was important. Of course, we needed to embed it in relevancy. So it wasn't like some people call it spray and pray approach, you're just throwing everything out. It was very specific, and we narrowed down that market to companies that had a specific integration that they could integrate with, and there was a specific entry point, and even being able to say that this company down the street, like 1 kilometer away, so they know that competitor already using this solution. So having a case proximity and being able to do that, those are things where you start crafting, you make a little bit the art. There is a science and art behind every outbound campaign. But I would say for such a company, of course, it makes sense to automate it at scale. You would not be able to do this by hand. But many companies that I've worked with are of the one-to-few and one-to-one approach. And for that one, I can share some more specific examples in the HR industry, the projects that I've been doing. But yeah, I'll give it back to you. What do you think? Are you actually differentiating different types of outbound
I
approach?
do know that you're a fan of the bow tie funnel. So according to me, I do know that a different ACV requires different efforts, right? We have multiple ICPs. So in regard to that, we have multiple approaches. If it's more broader type of company, meaning if it's a lower ACV, we can do a little bit more outbound than usual, right? And that doesn't really need to be signal based. It can be evergreen with a little bit of spice in it. Now, what does that mean? You have firmographic qualification criteria that gets you closer and closer to the custom signal that you have in place, right? So in that case, you can do it on a scale and let your content to actually do the heavy work. So I'm also rethinking this week. This is something that I haven't shared actually, but I've been rethinking how we do outbound within Signal Base for that particular low touch ICP and what work already. And we've seen 6 new accounts created and I launched it yesterday is because of the fact that we lead with education rather than through traditional outbound that is aiming to book the conversation. Because outbound nowadays, in my eyes, should just get the conversation going while actually harnessing the product and the brand to do the hard work, right? But it's a little bit different than whenever we transfer this methodology straight up into enterprise use case when we talk to CEOs that have companies with 8 to 10 digits in revenue. And the pain point is super clear. There it's, okay, we need to book the call, right? It's not so much educational. So there are different levels. I do think that you do need to define the clear distinction between evergreen plays that are running next to your marketing. And then you do have this premium ICP that you really want, where you invest a lot of your time, you deeply research about it, you monitor for dedicated signals that goes with interactions, and then harness all of these informational bits within your next outbound to leverage this further. And exactly what you mentioned with the cybersecurity breach, we had a similar use case when we get pitch slapped by one AI SDR. The outbound wasn't the greatest. I sent a message to the CPO and was like, hey man, maybe it's worth revisiting the conversation that we had a few months ago, because I do know how I can help you to improve the relevancy targeting of your LLMs. So that's how I see it. You need different motions for different ICPs according to how big is your time.
Definitely. And I love that you mentioned actually the bow tie funnel from Winning by Design. They also have this go-to-market model that I'm often also referencing, is exactly what you said, that different types of ACV, they actually require different go-to-market motions. And the go-to-market motion is not only sales, as we sometimes might simplify, but it's a different go-to-market motion on the sales side, marketing, and customer success side. If you're thinking of that you want to go after just 100 of target accounts, which value could be in hundreds of thousands or millions even in some niche cases, Like you want to go with a dedicated ABM approach. I would even say like field sales, going to events, multi-stakeholder, buying committee, multi-threading on different angles in person and digitally. But if you're going after tens of thousands of accounts and their ACV, annual contract value, is much lower, it's in the thousands of dollars, this annual contract value would not justify the customer acquisition cost if you apply those super expensive tactics, right? And you have a seller for every 100 accounts. So it really needs to be aligned with one another. And I think this loops very nice back to what we discussed about start with strategy first, then add technology at the end, because this will also define which tools you use, what kind of signals you provide, and how deep you need to go to actually get it into a success. And sometimes it's about starting conversations. Sometimes it's about booking a call immediately. And the same signal source, for example, in HR, can mean a completely different thing based on the context in which you embed it. And one example I would like to give here is I've been working with a company that was providing digital headhunting services for companies and that was going after passive candidates that are not actively looking for jobs on the job boards. And this was for more traditional job positions, like going into, we've been scraping the local job boards that were not available via any API at that point or any platform. And then we've been finding out, for example, CNC operators in production facilities for manufacturing companies. And if you think of a CNC operator on a production line, if you are recruiting for that specific person, what does it mean? That you don't have enough or you don't have even any CNC operators. Sometimes those were multiple jobs to be filled. And if you think about the context behind it, it's not like looking for a web developer for a software agency. What is the cost and pain of not filling out a CNC operator? Your production line can stop. So when you reach out to a production manager or an HR director who is under a huge pressure to get a CNC operator for the production line to keep going, and you say that you can source the candidates and that you helped another company to source within 1 or 2 weeks, and you've seen that their job opening was there for 30 days or something, you know they're under huge pressure, it's relevant, and it's also urgent. And signals are not only about relevancy, it's very good if they are about relevancy, but also relevancy plus urgency and a specific pain point, it makes it completely different. Those people were replying the same day and saying, we need to get on the call, we need to start it, when can I pay? That's completely different thing because you embedded it in a specific context. And we've actually identified across so many industries like transportation, other things, healthcare, we figured out that CNC operators on production lines are causing the biggest urgency and relevancy for the people we're reaching out to. And that was the best performing outbound campaign I've ever done with the highest reply rates. And people were just converting super quickly because it was embedded in the context. It wasn't just, oh, we have a hiring signal. So you need to get deeper sometimes.
It was a masterclass, by the way, into how to get the context and bake it into your outbound. But something that we haven't covered is the mistakes that you made, Pavel, because you came such a long way. That's brilliant, everything that you just said. But yeah, where did you stumble?
I think I stumbled at trying to apply those principles to every single company that I pitched at some point when I went into advisory work. And I felt, okay, it worked for this one so great. I can actually apply it for another company. Of course, apply it to their context, but let's go with it, right? And I've been selling on, we can do a signal-based campaign here. There are the signals that we could use. And I've been selling a project, and then I get in and I figure out there is no product market fit, there is no GTM leadership buy-in and maturity, there are no strong case studies that you've actually done the work, and those are things that I couldn't fix. The founders of that company would need to fix the product market fit issue. They weren't yet at the point where they could use actually all the beautiful processes or technology, anything that I could do there. But they were expecting for me to do the magic because I said I've done it for other companies. So I think that's been my biggest mistake. It was confidence in what I can do without getting actually deep into the company and figuring out they are not ready to actually utilize that and convert it into pipeline. And I've had companies where I tried to replicate similar approach, which worked perfectly and had much worse results. Or even in worse scenarios, I had a client where we sent out, I think, several thousand emails and didn't get even one positive reply. And I was like, okay, something is super wrong here. And I realized it's not one size fits all. And even though I was trying to scale things up on my end to have a repeatable offer, I then quickly realized in advisory work, when you're an advisor, you shouldn't prescribe before you diagnose. It's a bad doctor example. I came and said, we can do it. I've been sharing my own success stories. Great, I'm going there and I'm having a problem. Because what I diagnosed, I thought, because they said we want an outbound motion in place. But I didn't ask, okay, what is your current conversion rate? What is your value proposition, your case studies? How much do you currently get from your outbound that you do manually? And can we scale it? I was trying to scale something that was broken, and then I was in trouble. No amount of my work could fix it, but I already promised to bring great results. And honestly, it's been a hard position to be in because you feel you're not in control to fix it. But I think overconfidence in that you can apply a specific strategy from company to company, that's been something that I've been struggling with in the beginning of my advisory journey. And that's been a mistake I've done several times. And now I figure out, okay, Pawel, you need to go deep into discovery before you promise anything, right? And I think that's been cold shower, a learning, but yeah, finally.
Yeah, that thing, it's also like a ego killing type of experience, which is nice because I also got it when we were trying to build signal base. I thought that I'm the growth guy, right? I can come in and figure it out. In November, whenever we started, the landscape was so easy to read, but then so many vendors came in, pricing changes that disrupted the whole thing. Yeah, it's definitely not one size fits all type of experience. All right, because we're at the end of the show, Pawel, what is, and I do want to continue talking about context engineering, by the way, but we sadly don't have time. Maybe if you guys like the episode, do let us know. We'll create another one. But just to wrap it up on a quite nice manner, Pawel, what is an underrated advice that you can give?
I think the most underrated advice is to not try to blindly follow every hack you see currently on LinkedIn. And everyone's saying you can do it with Cloud Code, you can do it with NA10, you can do it with this, that tool. I would say always put your context in, get your brain into whether it's actually applicable for my business, and test it out in an MVP approach before you invest a lot of money and fire your entire GTM team because you can automate it with AI. But actually, then you realize you need to get them back. But it's not going to happen. So yeah, definitely don't believe blindly every golden solution and advice out there.
So there you have it. Salespeople are important. Context engineering is important as well. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next week.